Hey everyone, thanks for joining and welcome to our ForeFlight for Student Pilots webinar. This webinar will be sort of a counterpart to the webinar we did last week, which was ForeFlight for CFIs, and it will cover many of the same topics and features, but from a slightly different perspective. So instead of demonstrating how ForeFlight can help CFIs do their job, this is really more about showing how ForeFlight can help students better learn to fly, better reinforce the fundamentals of flying, and just be more prepared for when they take their check ride and moving into a future in flying. Our presenters today are Susan DeCastro and Chris Mauser. Both of them are CFIs. Susan has been with ForeFlight for 8 years, and both of them are part of the pilot support team. Susan has been a CFI for 30 years and also does corporate and charter work. Chris went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. He is a CFI, CFII, MEI, and he's been a CFI for 9 years. So both of them have quite a lot of experience with training students to teaching them how to fly, and both of them are experts on ForeFlight. So they will be presenting this presentation. On the docket for today, they're going to start with a demonstration of, or a conversation about electronic flight bags generally, just what an electronic flight bag is, how you use them, and just some of the some information around those. Next up, they'll move into a discussion more about ForeFlight specifically, how you can use ForeFlight as a learning tool, and really how it can help you benefit the most during your flight training. And finally, they'll talk about specific features in ForeFlight that can enhance your training, both in terms of helping to reinforce those fundamentals like I mentioned, but also providing greater safety and confidence with in-flight features. Finally, at the very end, we will have some live Q&A where we'll answer a number of questions that you all have submitted. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items here. You can ask questions via the GoToWebinar message panel on the right, and we will be responding to as many questions as we can during the presentation, and then we'll pick a few of those to respond to during the live Q&A at the very end. So please don't wait until the Q&A at the very end to submit a question. Whenever a question pops into your head, feel free to go and type it in and send it to us, and we will get back to you with an answer as soon as possible. We've had some issues in past webinars with people experiencing audio or video problems. We recommend joining from a computer, not a mobile device. And so if you're on an iPad or an iPhone or anything like that, if you find that audio suddenly cuts out, then we highly recommend that you go to your computer and try to join from there. And if a computer is not available, then feel free to send us a question telling us that you're having problems, and we will be able to advise on how you can try to get around that. Or if you're having problems with any other device, just let us know and we'll do what we can to help you out. This session is being recorded and it'll be accessible at foreflight.com/on-frequency afterwards. So if for some reason you aren't able to resolve those problems, you can always go to that webpage tomorrow and you'll be able to watch the full thing there. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chris to get us started.
Thank you, Sam. Pleasure to be here today. What does EFB stand for? What does an EFB even do? And the short answer, or the easy answer, is that an electronic flight bag is just a resource that pilots use. They use it to flight plan. They use it to actually go on a flight and execute a flight. And it's all just presented digitally via an electronic device like an iPad or an iPhone. You know, so it's got things like charts. It's got your weather information. It's got some documents that you can refer to. All the different flight planning tools that a pilot would need to plan a flight successfully, and much, much more. So it really just boils down to centralized information, situational awareness, and that just all that situational awareness and that information helps you make better decisions.
Yeah, when I learned to fly, everyone started out with this big pile of maps and reference books, and planning a flight looked quite literally something like this. When you start to fly, it can feel like drinking from the fire hose. This picture really gives you that feeling of that kind of overwhelming amount of information. But keep in mind, you'll still be taught what all of these resources have to offer. And it's important to spend some time doing things what we call the old-fashioned way. This will actually help you to learn and understand some of the basic concepts of flying and weather. But it's also super helpful to have a way to organize all these resources and just to have them available right at your fingertips. So I've become really jealous of today's student pilots. With ForeFlight, organizing these things is easy, and this picture quickly turns into this picture. It's one simple, lightweight device. I am truly amazed every day that we no longer need to carry a big bag of charts and books around on every flight. It's all right there in one iPad. ForeFlight will make your life easier, but it won't do it all for you. You still need to spend some time learning the fundamentals of being an aviator. So you're going to let ForeFlight filter in when it's appropriate to improve the experience of training and flying in general. And as you'll see in this presentation, take your time, use ForeFlight as a check and balance for your manual work, and then slowly add different features of ForeFlight into your toolkit. Now that we've seen how life-changing an EFB can be, let's jump into some best practices for flying with an electronic flight bag. First, if you're going to use ForeFlight, you'll need an iPad. There are 3 big considerations when obtaining an iPad. The first one is screen size. Depending on personal preference, you might choose a mini iPad or you might choose a larger size iPad. Many pilots prefer the mini if they're flying something with a smaller cockpit, less space. I tend to prefer a larger iPad. With my aging vision, I find the larger format a little bit easier to see. Your next choice is going to be between Wi-Fi and a Wi-Fi plus cellular model of iPad. The cellular capable iPads add an internal GPS. This internal GPS is super helpful in flight to be able to see your position on maps. If you don't have that capability, if you have a Wi-Fi only iPad, you can still connect to an external GPS, so it's possible. But we recommend the cellular model just for the convenience. You don't need to enable a data plan if you choose that model. You just need that type of iPad to have the internal GPS. Your last consideration will be storage. Our recommendation is 128 gigs minimum of storage. That doesn't mean ForeFlight will take up that amount of space. The amount of space you use will really depend on what charts and data you're downloading. So if you're downloading charts for the whole United States, you'll probably take somewhere between 50 and 60 gigs. But if you're downloading charts for the United States and Canada and Europe, it can get bigger quickly. Also consider what other things you might be doing with that iPad. If you're downloading lots of movies, you want to make sure you have space for that and that you're not going to impact ForeFlight by doing something like that. Lastly, on this side here at the bottom, you'll see I have a link to our buying guide page. This is a great resource if you're going out to look into purchasing a new iPad.
All right, cool. So you've got your iPad figured out, you got the size and the different capabilities of the iPad. Now it's time to actually purchase ForeFlight. So we offer 3 subscription levels. Starting with the Basic Plus, you're going to get all the essentials that you would need to fly both VFR and IFR. So your charts, navigation tools, different terrain and obstacle data, plates, documents, the list keeps going on. We also have the ability to calculate weight and balance, utilize an electronic checklist and an electronic logbook. So moving on onto the next level, we have our Pro Plus subscription, and it's got everything you would see in Basic Plus with some added safety features and situational awareness tools. So we have things like geo-referenced approach plates and text diagrams, hazard advisor, profile view, and synthetic vision. And then our top tier subscription level is Performance Plus. It's, again, everything you would see in Basic Plus and Pro Plus, all coupled with advanced flight planning tools. So detailed performance, different things you need to do takeoff and landing calculations. And then some really cool features in the Performance Plus is your 3D pre-departure clearance, something for you IFR folks, and digital ATIS. So your iPad is like any other system in the aircraft. It needs to be checked and it needs to be maintained. So we made a checklist to help you out with that. Susan, can you walk us through the EFB checklist?
Yeah, conveniently, ForeFlight actually has this EFB checklist built right into our checklist feature. This will help you get into the routine of pre-flighting your devices, which will make sure you don't miss important items. Some of those things that you're going to check off on that EFB checklist are to make sure your ForeFlight version and your operating system are up to date. Make sure all your Veer devices are charged. And then make sure you have the right materials downloaded onto that device. Make sure you have the right charting, and then also make sure you've set up any binders or routes or Scratchpads or things that you want to make sure you have access to before you head out to the airport. It's really important to do this stuff at home when you have a good internet connection. You don't want to be relying on internet at the airport or needing to like charge up a battery just before you're heading off on a long flight. So make sure you do that at home. Also, you want to make sure to think about any external devices you want to bring with you, or any mounts or knee boards, that kind of thing, to make sure you have it all with you.
Yeah, remember to have all this done at home, again, when you have a solid Wi-Fi connection and plenty of time on your hands. So it's also really important to have an available backup on board, right? Or two for that matter. So with ForeFlight subscriptions, you can get 2 iPads and 1 iPhone, or the vice versa of that is 1 iPad and 2 iPhones, whatever suits your needs best. So, most of us have an iPhone anyways, right? I always have mine in my pocket. So it just makes sense to have ForeFlight installed and ready to go. So that being said, don't forget to maintain your backup as well. So use that EFB checklist to not only pre-flight your primary device, but also your backup device. Now let's kind of get into how we can integrate ForeFlight into your training, right? The main premise of this presentation. So you have your hardware set up, you have your software set up, and now, Susan, how can we actually start utilizing ForeFlight?
I think a great place to get started is with the Pilot's Guide to ForeFlight. This is available right in the app on the Documents page, or if you prefer, you can view it on our website. It's a technical document, so a little difficult to read cover to cover, but if you take some time to skim through and get familiar with what's in there, you'll likely find a few features that you immediately want to dive into and learn a little more about. Then you can go back to the guide whenever a question arises. There's a search function that'll take you right to the topic you need. Also, on our website, we have a great video section. This can be another great way to start learning about the app. In fact, after this webinar, I recommend going straight to the ForeFlight Fundamentals video. It's great for student pilots to get started on real details of using the app. So everyone's told you to get ForeFlight. You've purchased an iPad. You've taught yourself a little bit about how to use ForeFlight. Then you go out for your first few lessons and you find you're not really using this tool. So we have a saying in aviation. It's called aviate, navigate, communicate. The idea here is, first, you want to make sure you fly the plane. Then, once you're comfortable with that, make sure you're navigating properly. And then once both of those are in place, then you can communicate with ATC or maybe passengers or anyone in the plane. And then after that, we consider it at that point that you're available to start looking at your iPad and using your EFB. It's at the discretion of your CFI on when you'll incorporate features, But there's many places you can really start using ForeFlight as a tool to help your learning process before you start using it right in the aircraft with you.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. So depending on the lesson you're doing, you're going to naturally and progressively use the app more and more, right? So there is a place to use ForeFlight on your very first lesson, and then obviously all the way up and through your check ride and beyond, maybe into your next flight training endeavors, maybe your instrument or your commercial. So again, it just makes sense. As you get more experience and you build your pilot skill, these opportunities are going to present themselves when you can integrate ForeFlight. And it's going to become more and more invaluable. I know personal experience, ForeFlight is, in my opinion, just simply irreplaceable. I just don't know how I go fly without it. So from day one, when learning to fly and beyond, you're going to find that ForeFlight will just kind of naturally meet your flying needs, and that's great. That's what you want. So let's kind of get into some examples of how we integrate it here. On the left iPad here, we just have your basic airports tab, and sitting at home, getting to know ForeFlight, you're going to maybe tap on this tab and just start exploring your home airport. Find the different tabs within the airport tab and look at the different runways that are available. Maybe the different lengths of those runways and the widths and some of the features about that runway. Get to know the different frequencies for your home airport. Maybe pique your interest. What's ATIS? What is clearance delivery? Obviously we've heard of ground and tower. And then just again, just get deeper into your home airport, and maybe even explore some of the airports you want to fly to in the future. And then in the middle iPad, you'll see an airport diagram with the airplane shown on the ramp there. And so what that's going to do is going to give you some situational awareness. And when you have situational awareness, it's going to increase your safety margins. And so you can use that portion of ForeFlight on your very first flight lesson. And I think your instructor will be happy that he sees you already using a tool to help you maintain safety while you're flying or learning to fly. You're going to find this georeference taxi diagram in the Pro Plus and higher subscriptions. And then on the right side, you'll see that we have a bunch of stuff going on, right? So we have combinations of features, and when you're able to do that, we call that a power user. And so you, on this screen on the right, this iPad, you have synthetic vision going with the full array of backup flight instruments, all kind of presented in a split screen scenario. On the bottom, you have an IFR approach plate with the procedure advisor showing the route on that approach plate. And you'll see a little green blob there at the bottom. That's your radar showing that there's some precipitation in the area. Again, this is all available on the Pro Plus and higher, and some really cool features that you can layer up. But we do really, really want to stress that it's important to learn the fundamental skills and learn those the long way, right? It's so important to really develop that base fundamental knowledge and skill set. So, being taught the old school way, I was taught, many pilots were taught the old school way, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually, in my opinion, the right thing to do if you're going to be a skilled and safe aviator. So let ForeFlight help you to its fullest potential and give you an even deeper appreciation for its utility. In other words, as you learn the fundamentals, you'll start to see how ForeFlight actually complements these fundamental skills that you've learned, and you'll just gain that much more appreciation for how to use it. So, to build a big, strong house, right, you have to have a solid foundation to build from. So when doing these old school methods, when being taught these old school methods from your instructor, don't be afraid to grab ForeFlight and use it to cross-check some of your work. So you'll see here we have a picture of the weight and balance tab. So, get that pencil and paper out, do the long form of computing weight and balance, and then go ahead and tap it into ForeFlight and use it to compare and contrast and see things from different perspectives. ForeFlight is very precise, so when you are doing the manual versus the ForeFlight cross-check, don't really get too hung up if your answers aren't 100% the same as you see in ForeFlight. Again, this is just to kind of cross-check that you understand the concepts and the basic skills on how to do something.
Now that you know a little more about how to learn about the app and your expectations are lined up, let's find some places where you can supercharge your knowledge and your training. Think of these ideas as a way to take ownership of your training. Certainly not to replace your CFI, who's your ultimate guide through your flying journey, but just a way to improve upon what your CFI is helping you through. First, the ForeFlight documents section is filled with useful handbooks and training materials on the app and some of its accessories. If we look at the FAA section of the documents, you'll find a whole bunch of useful handbooks. Some of these include the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge and the Airplane Flying Handbook. These are classic private pilot training books. There are aviation weather books, also the Airman Certification Standards. You may hear this referred to as the ACS. The ACS gives you the knowledge of what you need to do to be able to pass a check ride. So something you'll definitely refer to as you're getting close to a check ride. Also, the regulations and what we call the AIM are both in the document section. And those give you rules and regulations. Your CFI will guide you to the pertinent sections there. And once you've learned about them, you'll know where to go back to. And if they get updated, they're automatically updated in ForeFlight. So you're not going out and buying a brand new book of regulations every year. These are all available at no additional charge. An important feature within the documents is the ability to bookmark and to annotate your documents. You can easily highlight and write notes in important sections of those documents to help you when returning to study those sections later. So you'll see here how easy it is for me to write some lines and to highlight some words on a certain page.
Yeah, another cool thing you can do is import documents. So we recommend that you import the syllabus that you're going to use on your flight training or during your flight training, and import that into your documents. So it can be easily done via the AirDrop, email, or by linking a cloud storage account like you'd see like Dropbox. When you do this, it allows you to be informed and in the loop with where you are in your training and your progression, and the progression of your flight training. So when you're informed, it really means you're just more prepared. And when you're more prepared, you're going to learn faster. And learning faster saves you obviously time, but it's going to save you money. If you need help importing documents, you can always reach out to us at team@foreflight.com and we can help you with that. But as usual, you're going to need to ask your CFI to provide that syllabus for you so you can import it into your documents.
You'll find that ForeFlight really complements your flight training for each phase of flight. Some examples are seen on this slide here. Your pre-flight briefing is going to look very different at different phases of training and for different lessons. So on the left side, you're seeing a simple traffic pattern drawn on top of a map. And so you could be talking through how to enter the traffic pattern and how to properly fly a traffic pattern. Then in a more advanced lesson, you might be planning a cross-country flight around some complex airspace. And you can really take a close look at that airspace, both from the map view and from the profile view. And I'll just quickly note that that profile view is part of the Pro Plus subscription level. Then over on the right side, you're seeing someone preparing for what looks like an instrument flight. They're looking at an approach plate and talking through how to fly that approach into this specific airport. It looks like the plate is also overlaid on top of the map, which is again another Pro Plus level feature.
All right, and continuing with getting ready for your flight, a really important aspect is checking the weather. Really what you're doing is you're going to be analyzing all the different products and reports that are offered in aviation weather, and ForeFlight provides all these. So you're really, if you peel back the layers of the onion, what you're trying to do when you check weather is get to that go, no-go decision. Should we go fly? Or should we just stay on the ground and do a ground lesson instead? Or maybe today's weather means that this is a good idea or a good time to hop in the sim, or just simply push to another lesson altogether. Checking the weather and utilizing ForeFlight to check the weather with all its different interactive features is really going to help you make that go, no-go decision. And what you're trying to do is, as a student pilot, go from this concept of always asking your CFI, hey, is it okay if we go fly? Is the weather okay? And just waiting to be told to go fly. And then transitioning that concept into having a conversation with your CFI and letting your CFI know, I checked the weather, it looks good, let's go, or it doesn't look good for these reasons. I think we should consider maybe doing a ground or just canceling altogether. And really what you're doing is harnessing what we call pilot and command and aeronautical decision-making skills. It's really important for students to really start to understand and grasp that concept, and you can start doing that by checking weather.
Yeah, I love it when my students start to really get engaged with that weather decision.
Couldn't agree more. And so we don't just check the weather, right? I showed you earlier how we could go on that airports tab and start looking at some of the things about your airport, like runway information. There's also other pieces of information that you can get on this airports tab. A big part of getting briefed for a flight is checking what we call NOTAMs, or notices to airmen. So these are certain elements within flying that are really important pieces of information, like, are things inoperable? Are lights out of service? Or a really big one, are runways closed, right? Kind of important to have an open runway if you're going to go fly to or from an airport. Another thing we always consider before flying is, are there temporary flight restrictions, or TFRs? So such things as presidential visits or presidential movements, firefighting operations. These can all trigger TFRs, and you can check TFRs with ForeFlight.
The new internet traffic layer, it's available for all subscription levels. But when using this on the ground, it's a great new tool for preparing for a flight. You may have a situation where your instructor has restricted you to, say, an 8-knot crosswind for your solo flights. And you might be wondering, does that restriction really impact everyone, or is it just you? So you could go out and look at this internet traffic layer and get an idea of whether or not other 172s are flying on a given day. At what point does it get too windy for some aircraft to stop flying? You might also go look at the traffic pattern at an airport you're considering going to. Is it busy at that airport? And do you want to change your decision around which airport to go to?
I actually love to use this because let's be honest, it's a lot of fun just to sit in plain spot and see what people are doing, what kind of airplanes are flying, right?
Oh yeah, it's so true. I find this layer to be mesmerizing.
Yeah, it's fun. You can watch airplanes all over the world for hours.
Airspace is something you'll want to quickly come up to speed on, and your instructor will be teaching about airspace very early on in your training. Luckily, ForeFlight allows you to really explore airspace. You're not limited to learning just about the airspace that's in your home base area. You can look at all different kinds of charts and all different parts of the country in ForeFlight. If you happen to be flying in an area that doesn't have a lot of complicated airspace, you can easily pan over to an area that does and try to decipher, what is there a class Bravo here? Is there a class Charlie? Are they mixed together? It's really easy to try to decipher those things in ForeFlight. And for some real fun, if you're up for a challenge, go take a look at airspace in Europe. You'll quickly gain an appreciation for our U.S. airspace system.
Very, very busy and complex airspace in Europe for sure.
Yeah. So now I've spent some time learning about the different types of airspace. I'll see as soon as I create a route and I put that route line on my map, I can quickly see what types of airspace this route is going to be going through and what considerations I need to think about with that type of airspace. And if I have a Pro Plus or Performance Plus subscription, I'll have the option to also look at a profile view of my route. This is a really powerful view. I can see a cross section, so I can quickly see both the terrain, obstacles, and airspace along this route. I get that great visual along with some detailed numbers about the highest peaks along my route as well. If you study airspace in the profile view for a while, once your instructor starts talking about Class Bravo airspace looking like an upside-down wedding cake, you'll know exactly what they're referring to.
Yeah, teaching airspace on a two-dimensional piece of paper like we did back in the day was kind of daunting. But now with the Performance Plus level, you can actually review your route and airspace realistically with 3D preview. So if you look on the FPL or flight plan drop-down drawer here, you'll see the 3D icon is right next to the pack feature. You might be familiar with the pack feature from previous experience with ForeFlight. And if you tap on that, you will get a video, or I'm sorry, you will see this in this video exactly what that 3D review will look like. So if we play here, you'll see there's cool features like your waypoints that you have along your route. You'll see that you have a route line to follow, and it's all on top of high resolution satellite imagery. So really basically just doing the flight before you do the flight. It's kind of fun.
Oh yeah, 3D is a really cool feature. Map annotations is another tool that can be super helpful during the training process. Your instructor might write some notes on your map prior to a solo flight to help you remember where to go to practice your maneuvers or where to tune in the ATIS on a first trip to a towered airport. Or you might start writing notes as you work on cross-country flights to remember to change fuel tanks. You can write or draw in different colors to highlight things that are important to your flight.
Right, so you've briefed the flight, you've got lots of information at your fingertips, you're much more informed about what you're going to do. So you've decided on your route, so now it's time to share that route. You know, you might have been working with your CFI side by side, working on one singular iPad to brief and create the flight, and you can actually share it with a few taps here. You'll see on the right-hand side of the screen the Send To button. Tap on that. Then find whoever you're trying to share your flight with on the same network and tap on that person's little icon there. And voila, that person will then get a pop-up saying cancel or view route. Obviously, by tapping view route, it will now import that flight onto that other person's device. And now you're ready to hop in that airplane and go for your lesson. So while you are flying, and if you have any changes to your route or any kind of things that you'd like to share, if you're connected to a Sentry or Sentry Mini, because they do work on the same network, you're able to then share in the cockpit. Really handy feature. And the other main reason to have a Sentry or a Sentry Mini is for the ADS-B traffic and weather capabilities. Those are some concepts and some functions that you'll learn later on with your CFI. If you would like more information about Sentry or Sentry Mini, go ahead and visit foreflight.com/Sentry for more details.
Yeah, Sentry is a great add-on that you'll probably want as soon as you get out there doing some solo flights.
Absolutely.
So now that we've done all this briefing and preparing for our flight, let's get out to the airplane. One of the first things you learn as a student is to follow checklists. The aircraft will likely have a paper checklist you can use for each stage of flight. ForeFlight can present the same checklist digitally. You can check off items to see a visual representation of your progress through the checklist. And you can customize these checklists, so add items that your CFI recommends or that you find helpful on your own. And these checklists are super helpful to practice what we call chair flying. So at home, you can go through the checklist and reach your hand out and touch the throttle, touch the carb heat, touch the fuel selector. Practicing that flow will make it much easier when you get into the airplane. These checklists also include emergency procedures. Your instructor is going to want you to memorize some of the emergency procedures, and it's super helpful to have that easy access within ForeFlight to facilitate the memorization process. A great enhancement to the checklist function is what we call checklist speak. ForeFlight can play out the checklist items for you to hear so that you don't have to be looking down at the iPad the entire time. You'll hear a little bit of that
selector,
here.
switch tanks. Ignition switch, both. Fuel pump, boost.
As a student, this is also a good way to practice checklists. You can choose to have it play both the challenge and response, or just the challenge. And once you've run through all your pre-flight checklists and have the engine started, you're now ready to taxi. ForeFlight can immediately become useful to help you stay organized and ahead of the aircraft.
Yep, you're like you said, you're pre-flighted, engine's running, you're ready to taxi. And this is where I really like to utilize the Scratchpad feature. I think it's just such a simple but yet really effective little feature within ForeFlight. So you'll see it has the ability to either use a stylus or just simply your finger to just copy down notes, right? So you can copy down the latest ATIS or the latest airport information. You can get your specifics that are given to you by ATC to exit the airspace for a complex airport like a Class C or a Class B airport that you might be flying to or from. Or in the case if you're an IFR student, you'll use your CRAFT acronym to get your IFR clearance. It's such a handy feature. I love it, and I cannot tell you how many pens are lost in a cockpit by students every year. Once you drop a pen, there's really no finding it until that flight is over. There's just simply no room to move and find a pen that's been dropped onto the floor. So having this Scratchpad feature is really a kind of such a, like I said, simple but so effective and so handy. All right, so you got your ATIS written down, you got your clearance to taxi written down, and now you need to actually apply that. Some taxi diagrams, or some airports, shall I say, are really complex. So in order to maintain a level of safety, a level of situational awareness, you're going to want to use a geo-referenced taxi diagram that's in the Pro Plus or higher subscription level. You're going to be able to see your own airplane on the taxi diagram and really be able to see a big picture, a top-down view of where you are and where you need to go. And that's going to prevent things that are called runway incursions, and really big deal in the eyes of the FAA. You'll also be able to see where your FBO is, and it'll remove the guesswork when you're trying to taxi to an FBO at an unfamiliar airport or a new airport that you're visiting for the first time. It's also definitely worth noting there's a cool feature that when you land, the taxi diagram can automatically be displayed if you have it set up in the settings correctly. So that way when you exit the runway, boom, up pops the taxi diagram right there on top of your maps page.
Yeah, I often like to say that taxiing is the hardest part of flying, finding your way around on the ground, but these taxi diagrams are a game changer.
Agreed. You just don't have that vantage point like you are up at altitude. When you're down on the ground, it can get really confusing, especially at night.
Yeah. So now we've run through our checklist, we've taxied out, we're ready to get flying. In flight, one of the most useful features in ForeFlight is being able to display your position. You'll see here on this map, I have my little airplane icon showing me exactly where I am. This is also known as ownership. So make sure ahead of time that you know if your iPad has a GPS, and if it doesn't, know how to connect to an external one if it's available, because being able to see your ownership on the map is super helpful for your situational awareness. Also think about track up. You can choose whether to have the map showing north up always, or you can have the map showing your direction of flight at the top. You'll want to tap the auto center button at the top right to engage north track up. But just learn how to engage those things before flight so that depending on your preference, you know how to get it set up and the map looking the way you want. In addition to knowing your current position, you also have the option to show a breadcrumb trail. The green line you see here shows where you've flown during this flight. It's a great way to maintain awareness of where the flight's taking you. It can also help you to immediately evaluate some of your maneuvers. If you're trying to practice, say, turns around a point, you can get a good sense of whether or not you're actually making a circle. And then eventually the breadcrumb trail can be turned into a track log, which can be reviewed after the flight. And we'll talk a little more about track logs later.
Yeah, and continuing with situational awareness, as you can see, we've mentioned it many times already. It is very, very important in aviation. Well, with custom content, you can kind of take that situational awareness and take it to the next level. And so with custom content, you can import custom charts, or you can import custom map layers. And see, if you see here on this example, we have the different practice areas surrounding the University of North Dakota. And by having these map layers, you can then make sure that you stay within your practice area, because at bigger schools, or just practice areas in general, they can get very busy, and you can have airplanes encroaching into each other's practice area. So by having this map layer, you can prevent that. And that situational awareness will ultimately keep you safer. So another cool feature is the ability to import user waypoints. So you're at the practice area, you're doing your maneuvers, now it's time to come back in and call it a day. A lot of local airports will have kind of locally known reporting points that you're supposed to tell them and check in, and will allow you to then get permission to land or enter the pattern. So by having these user waypoints, you just make sure that that layer is turned on, cross over that waypoint, give your call to ATC, and everything's good to go. If you would like more information on custom content or learn how to do it, go ahead and visit a webinar put on by a colleague of ours, Joey Arena, that he did earlier. A really good webinar to learn more about custom content. So continuing with the theme of situational awareness, cool feature, distance rings and track vector. So distance rings are exactly as they sound. It's simply rings in a certain distance around your airplane at all time. It follows along with your own ship there. And it can be configured to show different distances or different time intervals, all based off of your ground speed. So learning how to estimate distance at altitude, and also getting used to the whole nautical mile concept, is kind of daunting at first, especially when you're busy learning to fly an airplane. So by having the distance rings function pulled up, it really can kind of remove some of that guesswork and give you a lot more accuracy when you're trying to estimate distance. So again, this concept of reporting to ATC gets even easier, because now when your distance ring touches, let's say, the outer ring of an airport, of the airspace of an airport you're going to, that can then trigger a reminder in your head to, oh, this is where I should call ATC and let them know that I'm coming in to land. You'll also see inside of the distance ring, sticking out of the nose of the airplane, is what we call the track vector. And simply, the track vector helps you see into the future, right? It's basically a projected track over the ground, and it can be set in terms of time or distance as well. So it's really helpful when you're trying to fine-tune your wind correction angle skills. In other words, when you're trying to track a specific line over the ground, what kind of influence is the wind having on you? And you can use this track vector to make sure that you're crabbing into the wind and following the line that you're trying to follow. On the right-hand iPad here, you'll see one of my favorites, and what I call a hidden gem, and it's the ruler function. So simply just hold down 2 fingers on the maps page until the ruler appears, and then just move your fingers as necessary to put the 2 ends of the ruler wherever you'd like. If you see here, I was on my way into the Phoenix area, decided I might do a last-minute diversion to my alma mater, Prescott, Embry-Riddle in Prescott, Arizona. And I wanted to know how much distance, how much time, and how much ultimately fuel would I need to do this diversion. And with the ruler, I can get that readout instantaneously and decide if that's something I want to do.
Yeah, that ruler really is a hidden gem. Not too many people know about it, but once you find it, it gives you some great information.
I love it.
ForeFlight includes some safety features that will really add comfort to your flying, especially when you start going out on solo flights. Glide Advisor is one of those. It puts a circular type shape around your aircraft that will give you awareness of where you could glide to in case of an engine failure. You'll see the green line here, the greenish line showing you that shape. It takes into account wind and terrain, so it often ends up looking very, very amoeba-like, as it definitely does here in this case in the mountains. I personally really like using this feature when I'm flying to some nearby offshore islands. It gives me great awareness of whether I would want to turn back or continue forward in case of some engine trouble. ForeFlight has lots of other alerts built in to warn you of things like when you're entering a runway or when there's traffic nearby. We also have a hazard advisor that can warn you if you're getting close to terrain or obstacles. These really add to the safety boost that ForeFlight can provide. You'll see here synthetic vision. This is part of the Pro Plus and Performance Plus level subscriptions. This would be a purely backup, something that you would use in case of a real situation, strange scenario where you need to, or you're having trouble, seeing out the window in front of you. But it can provide you with great awareness of what the terrain looks like and also backup instruments if you were to have trouble with your instruments. Hopefully you would never need this, but it can be really nice to know you have it just in case.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Having that option is really nice. I can't stress enough, though, that you want to go out and practice using that synthetic vision in a controlled environment with your flight instructor to make sure you know how it works and that you're comfortable using it before you actually have a situation where you would need to use it. And so speaking of situations where you need to have a backup, what are you going to do when things don't go as planned? What's your plan B, right? So knowing how your actual iPad works is the same as knowing how an engine works or how lift is developed on your wing. So we discussed earlier that ForeFlight offers multiple devices on the same subscription. So here's where you're going to bust out that backup, right? You're going to pull that iPhone out of your pocket. It should already be ready to go. It should be charged. It should have all ForeFlight loaded onto it and all the current data that you need. And so having access and having your backup ready is going to take what could be a really stressful situation, a situation where it might take your eyes off of actually aviating, navigating, and communicating, right? It's going to take that situation and it's going to completely make it a non-event. It's not going to be a big deal. It's, oh, I lost my primary device. Here's my backup device. We're moving on. Not a big deal. So in order to possibly troubleshoot that primary device before you just toss it away, maybe you want to just do some basic troubleshooting. So understanding basic functions on like how to dim or brighten your screen, how to manually kill the app and restart it, or restarting the iPad altogether, how to hold down the button on the side and get the iPad to turn off and then turn it back on. And like I said earlier, with the synthetic vision, this is a process that you're going to just want to practice on the ground. It's really not that hard, but trying to do that and fly an airplane at the same time, especially for a newer pilot, it's going to be a little daunting and it's going to definitely get your stress level up. So learning how to do this and practicing it on the ground ahead of time, again, turns that potential scary event into a non-event.
So you're back from a successful and a productive flight. Let's take a look at some tools you can use to review how you did and to memorialize your flight. Here we have what's called a track log. A track log is a recording of your flight that you can share. It's saved in the cloud. And it records things like your flight track, as you see here on the map, as long as your speed and altitude. And if you are connected to a device that records attitude, you could also be recording your pitch and bank at the same time. These track logs are great for revisiting different points in your flight or scenarios in your training to kind of review what happened and discuss it with your instructor. And then you can hopefully course correct for the next time if you need to. After a solo flight, you can share your flight with your instructor and get feedback remotely from your instructor. And all of these track logs are accessible from any of your devices because they are stored in the cloud. You could review it later on your phone or on your iPad. This is such a handy tool. Boy, do I wish I could go back and review on my flights from when I was soloing.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I wish I had this when I was going through my flight training. But that being said, I do utilize this every time I go fly with one of my students. So let's go ahead and show you an example of the track log here. So here you'll see as I zoom in to kind of get more information that we left our local Class C airport and we just decided to go north. And as we headed north, we decided we were going to do what are called unusual attitudes. So I put a view limiting device on my student and upset the airplane and had my student recover. You can see that here. And look at all the different metrics that you get from the track log. So we were able to review this and see where maybe some of the things he did on the unusual attitudes needed to be tweaked. So after that, we're off to our home airport to practice some short and soft takeoffs and landings. And you can see here that after a few circuits of the pattern, I kind of needed to work with my student on how to tighten up his pattern shapes. Can you see there we also exited the runway and we taxied back for one more takeoff and one more landing. Really cool feature to review flights and, like Susan said, see what you did okay and see what you need to work on and do better the next time. So you can take these track logs and like we said, study them, use them to do better on future flights. In the in the Performance Plus level, you can actually touch the 3D button here on the right hand side of the track log and get a 3D replay of the track log. Fun little thing, we're going to show you that here. So yeah, we took off from that Class C airport. As we take off here again, you're seeing our route line. And while we're flying here, it's all on top of, again, high resolution satellite imagery. You can move around and get different points of view. We do have a POV button there on the bottom left. You tap that and now you're back in the cockpit in the first person view. Because we were attached to the device that gives us the pitch and bank information, also known as AHRS, while we were doing the unusual attitudes and then reviewing it later on the 3D, we can see those bank and pitch information. I went ahead and fast forwarded here so you can see kind of as we get into the unusual attitudes. Again, just another way to really review and talk about the flight, see what you can do better. Really, really fun, and I definitely use this every time we go fly and review a flight. All right, so you've done the flight, you've reviewed it, you've used your track log, you played some 3D to really drive it home, and now it's time to put that flight in your logbook. So, of course, with any logbook, you can manually put in the flight you did. So tap all the different fields, put in the required information, and now you have credit for that flight and those hours. Or you can have the track log import into the logbook at what we call a draft entry creation, basically a rough draft automatically sent to the logbook. So you can save you some time, save you some steps. Just review it, add any additional information that maybe wasn't put in there for you, and hit save, and now you have that flight memorialized forever. So you can do a quick review, like I said, and I cannot tell you how many flights that I have forgotten to log. I know that sounds a little odd, but when you're flight instructing every day, all day, doing 4 or 5 flights a day, going from one airplane to the next, sometimes you just don't have time to log flights and they slip through the cracks. So this draft entry creation is such a cool tool to make sure that you don't miss any hours. I know earning hours are very important to CFIs when you're trying to move on to bigger and better jobs.
Yeah, having the ability to have a track log start your logbook entry is super helpful. ForeFlight also has the ability to add photos into the logbook entry. This is a great way, to sentimentally remember your flight. Also, ForeFlight will automatically suggest photos. So if it knows you've taken photos during that time of flight, it will automatically suggest those. It makes it really fun to go back and look at your different flights and see what happened. Also, if you're a visual learner, going back and looking at those photos can help you remember, what points you wanted to improve upon. And lastly, if you have any maintenance squawks that you want to remember, you can take photos of those and include them in your logbook and remember to report them back to maintenance. Part of earning your pilot certificate is satisfying very specific requirements. Logbook reports can give you an instant output to know how you're progressing along there. You want to make sure that you've hit all the requirements and you're legally ready for your check ride.
Yeah, it's super embarrassing when you get all the way to the check ride with the examiner and the examiner is able to find where you missed a requirement. So to prevent that, we have reports within the logbook. Here you'll see I have a private pilot airplane single engine land report. It is worth mentioning that your flight instructor should help you fill in your logbook entries to make sure that you don't miss really important or critical data fields. The whole point of this is obviously to earn experience, earn hours that all apply towards getting your certificate or rating. So here you can see I have the 40 hours of flight time clicked off, and I have the 10 takeoffs and 10 landings to a full stop at night, but I'm missing all kinds of other requirements. So it looks like if I want to get that private pilot certificate, I better get busy and get flying, right, Susan?
Yeah, Chris, you got some work to do.
I know. Well, I'll get there. It just takes time, right?
Yeah. So there's a saying that the cockpit makes a terrible classroom. For this reason, if you have access to a simulator, you can connect ForeFlight to the simulator, and simulating your flights is a great way to learn about the app. You're not taking up valuable time in flight. You can stop and start things within the simulator, and it costs a whole lot less money. We can connect to a whole bunch of simulators, and if you're looking for more details on that, we have a webinar put on by Ryan McBride a few weeks ago. You go look for that out on our website, a great way to get more information on connecting to simulators. So to wrap things up, to summarize what we've talked about today, here's a few pointers for you to think about. Don't forget you're going to want to learn the fundamentals. Don't be afraid to learn things the old way. I know it's fun to use the app, but learn it the old way. Your CFI will guide you to incorporating the app. Knowledge is power in aviation. Be a sponge, study hard. This knowledge will supercharge your training, as you've seen here. Being prepared will really help you to own your training. Integrate ForeFlight organically. Let ForeFlight fulfill your training needs as they present themselves. And let ForeFlight enhance your flight training experience. ForeFlight is designed to make being a pilot easier and safer. And lastly, just make sure to get out there and fly. Have fun. Enjoy the flying part of it. As always, please reach out to us. If you have any questions, we are always here to help. You can reach us at team@foreflight.com. We're all pilots. We're all happy to help. We really enjoy connecting with other pilots. Even feel free to send us your stories. We love hearing aviation stories, and we always share them among the team when they come in. Thank you all for joining us in this conversation today. Chris and I really appreciate the opportunity to connect. As instructors, we always look forward to watching students grow in their aviation knowledge and skills. And it brings us an extra smile to see students using ForeFlight to enhance that progress.
Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
All right, so now we're going to move on to some Q&A. First question, are student pilots permitted to use ForeFlight during flight exams? And Chris, do you want to take that one?
Absolutely, Sam. This is a question that obviously a flight instructor would get towards the end of the training when they're actually preparing for the check ride. And the short answer really is to just talk to your DPE, right? DPEs are human beings. Most of them are professional pilots and have other jobs, or they're a flight instructor as well. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with reaching out to the DPE, getting to know the DPE, getting more comfortable with that person, and just kind of asking them what are their thoughts on the check ride? What are you allowed to do? What are you not allowed to do? They're more than willing to share that information. It's not a secret. They want you to succeed. They want you to pass. They're not there to just fail you just because they're bored. So yeah, just call them, email them, have a conversation, and really just get really briefed on your check ride. That will help the day of. That'll get rid of some of the nerves that are naturally present when going for a check ride.
Awesome. Next question. Do I have to purchase a separate subscription to have ForeFlight on my iPhone if I have a subscription on my iPad? And Susan, can you answer that one?
Yeah, so the quick answer is no, you don't. An individual subscription will allow you to use ForeFlight on 2 iPads and 1 iPhone, or 2 iPhones and 1 iPad. What you want to do to get running on your iPhone is simply download the app from the App Store, and then you will sign into your subscription using the same email address and password that you do on your iPad. And if you have any difficulty with that, please email into us. We can help you get going on that quickly.
All right, next up. Where do we find the EFB checklist in ForeFlight? I'm looking now and I can't find it. Susan, can you take that one as well?
Sure, yeah. So you want to navigate to the checklist area of the app. So you'll go to More and then Checklist. Once you get there, you'll tap on the plus sign at the top, which will take you to the templates. And you'll find a bunch of airplane checklist templates. But if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll find EFB Preflight. That's the EFB checklist that we showed. You also see there a couple of other interesting checklist templates. One's called the I'm Safe checklist. If you're not familiar with that, it's a great one to go through just to make sure you're ready mentally and physically to take on a flight as a pilot. And there's also a passenger briefing there. Once you get to the stage where you're taking passengers, it is a requirement to give a passenger briefing on every flight. So this is a great starter template to help you know how to get through the passenger briefing.
All right. The GPS constellation is great, but stuff happens. And from time to time, there are areas of deliberate interference. What do speakers suggest as an appropriate backup? What strategy should I consider to address that abnormal situation where I need alternate navigation resources from GPS? Chris, can you answer that one?
Absolutely. This is actually a really good question because it kind of addresses a multifaceted different approach that you can take. So first thing that maybe you can mention is that the Sentry that I talked about earlier actually uses multiple constellations as a source. So, let's say our American-based GPS system were to go offline, which pretty much rarely or never happens. I mean, it does happen, but in certain locations usually. But it'll rely on other constellations to overcome that. Another thing is like we said, you're going to integrate ForeFlight naturally and progressively. Well, one of the things your flight instructor should probably take the time to do is to hand you a paper chart and take your iPad away, right? Or just have you keep your iPad in the flight bag just for maybe 1 or 2 lessons. and just kind of, like I said, teach you that old school way. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I think it makes us stronger, more competent aviators. To kind of further that, okay, so maybe you want to continue to use your iPad in the flight because you're using another capacitance, but you can turn off the own ship, right? So go into your settings, turn off the little blue airplane that follows along with you, and just use the ForeFlight app as just your charts, right? And learn to navigate that way. So there's many different ways that you can tweak the training, that your instructor can kind of take the lead on that and give you scenarios to teach you the old school ways. And not to mention, I already said the backup. That's another thing, right? So pull out your iPhone, make sure it's on or charged up, all the data is ready to go, and there's that seamless transition. So many different ways to overcome adversity in the cockpit, and that's kind of the essence of training to fly, right? You're learning to address some of these anomalies and non-standard things in aviation, because that's what it's all about, knowing how to address those times where things get tough in the cockpit.
Great answer, Chris. Thanks. Next question here. So this is a question about when flying an IFR flight plan, very often approach will issue a visual approach, and not being familiar with some airports, I would like to rely more on ForeFlight to help me out with that approach. The 3D view of the airport is very helpful to study the area, but it's not available when you're flying. So is there something I'm missing about how ForeFlight can help further with preparing for those visual approaches? And Susan, do you want to add some thoughts to that?
Yeah, sure. So this is really interesting because I know how you feel when you get cleared for the visual approach and you see the runway sort of, but you're not 100% sure, it's not a familiar airport. I really like using the extended runway center lines in a situation like that. We did not show that during this presentation, but it's something you can turn on in the settings. It will show on the map exactly where the endpoints are for the runways, and it extends it out a little further. So if you sort of aim right towards one of those extended runway center lines, it will help you line up on final perfectly. Another thing you can do is go into the procedures. So you tap the FPL button, then procedures, and you can add a traffic pattern into your route, and that will draw out the traffic pattern right on the map for you. So help you to enter in a downwind if you need to, or into the base easily. You'll have that drawn right on the map for you to help you at an unfamiliar field.
Great, thanks. Next question. What's the best or recommended way to mount the iPad during the flight? Kneeboard, window mount, yoke mount? So Susan and Chris, can both of you offer some thoughts on what you would recommend, or if there's not any one that you recommend, which style of mounting the iPad you prefer?
Yeah, so I generally, I'm in a lot of different airplanes, so I generally just kind of have the iPad on my knee. I mentioned before I use kind of a bigger iPad, but I know this is really personal preference. Some people, smaller aircraft really want it mounted. They want a mini, they want it mounted on the yoke or on the on a side window maybe. It's really going to be personal preference where you get comfortable with it. Obviously, you don't want it blocking out your view of any of your installed instrumentation, but you're going to want to try to figure out something that's comfortable for you personally. I know that both Sporties and My GoFlight sell lots of add-on devices that can help with that, so I would go and see what they recommend for those kind of things, for both knee boards and different kinds of mounting. And Chris, I know you have some thoughts on this also as well.
Yeah, my thoughts aren't so much on how you mount it or what device or hardware you use to mount it. Like you said, that's personal preference, and each cockpit is different. We also have different size iPads. Some people even just use their iPhone as their primary means of an EFB. So my advice really is more about best practices. So, doing that static in the airplane, getting it prepared before your flight, or getting comfortable with where you're going to put it is important. And what you're really trying to look out for is that your EFB, your iPad, is not actually taking away from your flight training experience, that it's not distracting you. that the mount isn't going to, come loose or fall off, or I've seen that many times actually. So while you're flight training, you want ForeFlight to enhance your training, right? You want it to actually add value to your training, not take away from your training. So if wherever you decide to put your iPad takes away from that, you're not aviating, navigating, communicating like we talked about earlier. You're simply addressing an iPad mounting problem. So just take some time, get it right, before you really get into your flight training, and I think you'll be very happy that you did.
Great advice from both of you. Thanks. Next question is, I've been trying to link my Dropbox, but have been unsuccessful. Where can I get assistance with that? And Susan, can you help this person out with this question?
Yep. One thing to double check is make sure you're on either the Pro Plus or Performance Plus subscription level. That's a feature that requires a little bit higher subscription level. Then you'll want to go to ForeFlight Web, which is at plan.foreflight.com. It's a website view of that allows you to plan and look at maps there as well. You want to go to your account page. Once you're there, it may show your name, and you'll find that on the left side of the screen, and then you'll find an integrations tab at the top. That's where you'll go to put in the information about your Dropbox account to link it. If you're having trouble, you're already at that tab and you're having trouble linking it, please email into us and we'll help you get through that. We do have a couple of articles we can send you, or we can troubleshoot the issue directly.
All right, next up, what sequence of motions would be necessary to split the screen when ForeFlight is running so I can keep my charts and plates in front of me while I review the detail of abnormal procedure checklists? Susan, can you also respond to that one?
Yeah, I can. As far as, first, I just want to be clear that the split screen capability is available. It just, as far as motion, it's just a swipe up from the bottom, just kind of a short swipe up from the bottom to get to the other app that you want to split screen with. Unfortunately, at this time, the split screen is only available with 2 different apps, so ForeFlight and one other app. So it sounds like the scenario you're talking about, trying to quickly get to an emergency checklist, is maybe solved in a different way. So with the addition of split screen, ForeFlight changed the user interface a bit, which I think will make this a lot easier. So if you've gone to the checklist feature earlier in your flight, you go more and then checklist to get there. Open up to that checklist you want to have ready, and maybe even the emergency procedure you want to have ready. As soon as you do that, then the checklist will automatically become the what we call the dynamic tab. So the tab just to the left of the more will always show checklist there once you've gone back over to maps. So once you have that set up, you can quickly go from maps back to checklist and then back to maps again, just by tapping the tabs at the very bottom of your screen.
I'll also add a little color into that, is that if you want checklist to be in the bottom tray there permanently, you can go to settings and edit tab order, and you can order all those tabs any way you like. So that way you can actually dock the checklist one to be unmovable, for lack of a better term. So
yeah, very good point, Chris.
All right, next up, does the breadcrumbs and track log features allow you to replay the flight in 3D, showing speed, altitude, etc., similar to Cloud Ahoy? And Susan, can you address that one?
Yeah, so yes, ForeFlight, I think we showed you can take a track log and there's a 3D button while you're viewing the track log that allows you to replay the flight in 3D. It's really powerful, really cool way to review your flight. It will show you the altitude and speed during flight. It can also show you pitch and bank if you were connected to an AHRS device, a device that would give you attitude. So that can be shown in the 3D review if you were connected to that device during flight. It doesn't show quite as much detail as Cloud Ahoy, but it is really a great way to review your flight. And if you wanted to use Cloud Ahoy, you could always export the KML file of your track log outside of ForeFlight to the Cloud Ahoy app.
All right, next question. Where do you turn on Glide Advisor along with many other feature settings? And Chris, can you point them to the right location?
Absolutely, there's a couple places, but the easiest way to get it is when you're already in the maps view. Just go to the very top of the app. You'll see a little gear icon or a little cogwheel. Tap on that and scroll down with your finger until you see the Glide Advisor section, and just simply toggle it on. You'll also have to have an aircraft set up with the glide ratio in order for that to work. So you obviously you need to know the performance of the airplane for the Glide Advisor to work, but it's very easy to get to that setting. That being said, one of the things we talked about was after you purchased your iPad and purchased ForeFlight was getting to know ForeFlight. I'd take this opportunity to say this is one of the ways you can get to know ForeFlight is going through the settings, having it all the different features on or off, or different metrics like do you want it in nautical miles or time. I think that's a really important thing to do to understand what settings are available. To get it set up like you like, and by default, you'll just get to know ForeFlight even more. Again, so that way when you're flying, if you're looking to use a feature or turn it off or adjust it, it's kind of a no-brainer. You're able to go straight to that part of the settings, toggle it on and off, make an adjustment, and you're never letting go of aviating and navigating, communicating. So yeah, get to know your iPad, get to know ForeFlight, and really check out the settings features and settings tab.
All right, next up, do multiple devices, iPad and iPhone, working off the same subscription share data? So if my iPad heats up during a flight and dies or runs out of battery, can I view my flight plan on my iPhone, i.e. the setup, the flight plan, the documents? Does all that stuff sync so that you can just pull out your other device during a flight and refer to the same information? Susan, can you answer that one?
Yeah, so most of your data will sync between your devices, not everything though. So your charts that you download, you need to separately download charts to both devices. So you want to really make sure you have that set up before flight. And the way routing works, it will sync between devices when you're connected to the internet. So if you you want to make sure you check your phone and that it has the route there and ready to go before flight, because once you get in flight, typically you don't have internet and you won't be able to enable that syncing. And if you make any changes to your route while you're in flight, if you've made the change on your iPad, it likely will not show up on your iPhone. This can be enhanced a little bit if you have a device like a Sentry that puts out a Wi-Fi signal, so you can connect both your iPad and your iPhone to the Sentry Wi-Fi. And using the Sentry, you can share flight plans through that Wi-Fi as well. But it's an active, it's something you need to actively do. You need to send the flight plan from one device to the other at that point.
And of course, if your primary iPad is dead, then that's probably not something you'd be able to do. So
true, yeah.
Good, all the more reason to make sure that your backup devices are properly set up with everything you need before the flight.
Before flight.
So next question, for internet traffic feature or any other new feature, what model of iPad is needed to see this? Do I need a newer iPad model? So Susan and Chris covered this a little bit towards the beginning of this webinar, and the answer is that right now, the most current version of ForeFlight supports any devices that can run iOS 12. I don't remember exactly which version of iOS 12 it is, but essentially that's all devices going back to the iPad Mini 2 and something like the iPhone 5S released in 2014. So any of those devices will support will support internet traffic. However, in a release that'll be coming up in the next couple months, we will transition to require iOS 13 for new app updates. And so that will sunset that iPhone 5S, the 6 and the 6 Plus, and then also the iPad Mini 2 and 3 and the iPad Air 1. So at that point, those devices will continue to work with the last version of ForeFlight that they're able to run. You could still download charts and things on them for a while longer, but you won't be able to get new versions of ForeFlight that come out after that point. So if you're looking to get a new iPad, definitely recommend that you get something that's more recent. You can buy refurbished iPad Mini 5s from Apple for very cheap, around $300 even. So definitely invest in something more recent because it'll be supported for a lot longer. Next up here, how do I change my icon to be a different type of aircraft? All I have right now is a jet, but I fly a Cessna 172, so it's hardly a jet, of course. Susan, can you point them to the setting where they can do that?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite settings. So if you go to more and then settings, you'll find one called current location marker. And you'll find lots of options in there. It's kind of fun. You can change your icon to look like an F-16 or a helicopter. You can go with a 747 or even something simple like a biplane, or you can have it look like your Cessna 172. So that's definitely a fun place to go to and try the different options for the current location marker.
Yeah, and not all of the icons are exactly the same size. Some are bigger than others. And so if you find that you sometimes have difficulty spotting that blue location marker on the map within a second or two, then I'd suggest using the B1 or B2 bomber icons because those things are massive and they are impossible to miss on the map.
That's a great idea.
All right, just a couple more questions here before we close it up. Do the ForeFlight logbook and weight and balance features have an option to regularly be exported with all entries in a format easily loaded into a database, spreadsheet, or word processor? Chris, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I'm actually on the logbook team, so I wanted to be able to answer this question. So I'll speak about the logbook first. Many of you maybe have never visited plan.foreflight.com before and actually looked at our web-based ForeFlight version. You'd use the same email credential, same password that you use in the app to access this. You can also use it for flight planning, but there you'll see a logbook tab. Go ahead and click on that logbook tab, and then you'll see another tab on that page where you'll see export. Tap on the export button, and boom, it'll send a CSV file to your local computer database, and you can save it. You can do that every single day if you want to. A word of caution though, if you make any changes to that CSV file and you go to import it back in without clearing out the original that's already that's stored in the cloud, you're going to then have a bunch of duplicates. So to that, I say don't be afraid to email us at team@foreflight.com, and we can walk you through any kind of export, import questions you may have. As far as the weight and balance is concerned, if you go to more weight and balance within the app, you'll see that there's a send to button on each one of the weight and balance profiles that you may have. You can email it to someone else. You can make a copy. Let's say you're flying 2 different tail numbers, but they're the same type of aircraft. So you can just go ahead and copy and make some changes to customize it to that tail number. Or you can print it off if you'd like to have a paper version of that weight and balance computation.
All right. How do you recommend marking waypoints when planning a VFR cross country? Apple Pencil, along route distance fixes. What is your recommendation for how you prepare for a flight like that? Susan, can you offer some insight on that?
Yeah, so I think it depends a bit on what stage of training you're at. But what I like to see students do is use touch planning to set up those waypoints. So initially, you can tap on the map or type in the departure and destination airports to put a route line on the map. And then you can put your finger on the route line and rubber band it. So drag it to the different waypoints that you want to go to. So I like to see students drag that route line a little bit left and right to something that they can really recognize, whether it's a lake or a certain airport they're going to fly over. So that they have to make a few little turns at least, and they have something very recognizable. And once you've dragged the route line to that point, you'll get a pop-up in ForeFlight, which will allow you to add that as a waypoint in your route. You can add it as a simple lat-long coordinate, or you can name it something if you want and save it as a user waypoint. That's the way I like to do it. I think you could also use the pencil to write annotations. It's a very simple way to really get started putting waypoints on the map and to be able to navigate using kind of pilotage and dead reckoning.
All right, we're at about 30 minutes past the hour here, so I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you so much, everyone, once again for attending. We hope you learned something and enjoyed this webinar. Obviously, these support resources have been on the screen for the past 30 minutes, and so feel free to refer to any of those for additional help. And as Susan and Chris have been saying, you can email team@foreflight.com anytime if you have any sort of question, especially if your questions were not answered during this webinar. Please just go straight to your email right now and copy and paste them into a new email and send them to team@foreflight.com, because they will get back to you with an answer. Finally, there is a survey at the very end of this, right when I hit the close button on this webinar. So if you don't mind sticking around for 30 seconds just to answer that survey, it'll help us know how we're doing and allow you to give us some ideas for future webinars. So with that, we're signing off. Thanks again, everyone, for attending, and we'll see you on the next webinar.